Hello and welcome to another Crusade video. Today we'll be covering the massive changes that came out from playtest to version 1.01. I wanted to wait a bit as the release of 1.0 was a bit messy and it was inevitable that the rulings would be changed. Add to that the holidays and the massive number of changes to scour through, and that's why it's coming out now, fashionably late. Of course, this is a comprehensive but not an exhaustive list. Ideally, this video will cover the most important rules changes and not little caveats and rules clarifications, though we will go over some of those here. There might be something I miss here from trying to vet like 200 pages worth of rules, and to that end I'd like to thank the Crusade community for also compiling their findings in a Google document linked in the description. All that out of the way, let's get into this. Firstly, models can no longer shoot and take a charge or fight action in the same activation, unless the model has the keyword assault. A small change, but it cleans up any ambiguity with attacking. Shooting into engaged targets is now a 50-50 roll that isn't random but chosen by the attacker. Say there's a Pilgrim and a Yoke Fiend that are engaged, the roll would be 1 through 3 for shooting your Pilgrim, 4 through 6 for shooting their Yoke Fiend. Elevated position bonuses have changed from 3 inches instead of 2 inches, so no more +1 a hit from the standard trench tops. Unarmed attacks have been removed unless something is specifically there, such as the prisoner's feeble flailing. Anything without a melee weapon does not get any attacks, so make sure to take your bayonets. 2 separate melee weapons are now considered one action. It brings it more in line with the current rule specifying that you can only make 1 unique action per activation, just a bit of cleaner text here. Diving charges have kind of changed. As long as your target is 3 inches below yours, you should be able to make the risky action roll. On success, it adds +1 to the next melee attack, where in a failure the model rolls down and takes an injury roll. This one is pretty big, and it's changing the warrior down rule, where now only melee attacks benefit from targeting downed models with the +1 dice to injure buff. This definitely hurts ranged units a bit while keeping the lethality of melee weaponry, but I suppose that's the benefits for keeping your distance to risking your little guys. Downed models are now unable to move for any reason until they stand up. These models also automatically stand at the start of their activations, which may mess with some glorious deeds that want you to take enemies while you're downed. Should you be downed, however, it ends the model's activation if it is done within your turn, so dangerous terrain can definitely become a lot more prevalent on the board. Morale has been changed to always incorporate the shaken rule in the first failure, but to stop the bleeding, fleeing is optional. Injuries for falling is cumulative based on the distance per 3 inches, where 3 would be 1+ dice to injure, 6 inches would be 2+ dice to injure, so on and so forth. Additionally, fly units are now immune to fall damage. As a huge boon to the bigger boys of the game, bases can now overhang a ledge, so long as 50% of the model is resting on the surface, which should help keep things like desecrated saints or anchorite shrines moving over trench lines. Speaking of bigger models that tend to fly, flying can now walk over impassable terrain unimpeded, but strangely are beholden to normal jumping rules rather than just flying over gaps. Bit strange, that one. Minus injury modifiers are now capped at 3, making the maximum roll for taking an out of action cap at 12. Basically, you can't become unkillable now trying to exploit machine armor and holy shields. Crusade has also adapted a system that I really like, being keywords like in Magic the Gathering or recently in Warhammer 40,000. It allows a way to remember abilities in a shorthand that makes things less daunting to write and understand. A lot of these keywords have also received changes, however. Armor piercing is a way to introduce less brutal ignore armor modifiers, which were seen in the game with weapons like Headtaker from the Core Army. Blast has incorporated the old aim clause for weapons, such as an engineer's satchel charge, rather than conflating the word aim with something like a sniper priest's aim ability. This allows a model to pick a point on the map or a model for rules purposes. Fire teams were changed much to their benefit from their 1.0 iteration where it was forced to activate together. Fire teams can now be assigned a warband recruitment in the quartermaster step. The golem keyword no longer can be paired with the tough keyword, bringing in a significant and probably well-deserved nerf to the Book of Golems from Explorations. Heavy weapons have caught a significant change as well, not allowing the user to shoot in the same phase that they try to move, charge, retreat, or dash. Impervious was added to signify any armor that isn't affected by the armor piercing or the ignore armor keyword, cleaning up the wording of effects such as the Holy Icon shield or the Hell Knight armor. The pistol's keyword was changed to include the range and melee characteristics when using it as a melee weapon, keeping sniper priests deadly in fisticuffs. As for overall weapon changes, the following have been changed. Auto pistols no longer have a -1 dice injury modifier, making them worth their coin. Bayonets are restricted to not having another melee weapon, giving them a bit more relevance. Heavy flamethrowers was changed to have the -1 dice modifier, but can now make 2 attacks unlike its smaller flamethrower, giving it less lethality but double the volume. Grenades were changed to be able to make a ranged action at a point of the map or at a model, due to the changes of the blast keyword, while also being noted as to not being a ranged weapon themselves. Shrapnel grenades specifically have lost the -1 dice to injure modifier for additional targets hit by the blast, giving it a bit more legs to stand on alongside its brothers. Machine armor is finally clarified to increase any model that takes it to a 40mm base, and any attack that would take said model out of action with the tough keyword is downgraded to a minor hit per the machine armor rules, keeping the model up and not downed. This notably increases any follow-up attacks that this model would take, making it far more survivable. With the introduction of special ammo such as dum-dum rounds, a new clause was added where it cannot be taken on any weapon that already has the blast, fire, gas, or shrapnel keyword. The patrons in the campaigns have been changed quite a bit, starting off with the Temporal Lord. The Temporal Lord now limits the armor/equipment, weapon, and ranged weapon procurement ability to only 1 model each, not allowing a stacking effect of discounts. Warrior Saint's Dragon Slayer now allows an injury roll to change any result into a 6, rather than setting a 6 to attack before the injury roll. This is arguably better, as it lets you switch your worst result rather than gambling on a dice roll. Learned Saints Favored by God now allows the ability to stack, making glory farming stocks shoot to the moon. Knowledge of Science, however, is now limited to 1 per warband, so you can't spam anti-tank hammers and satchel charges anymore. Logistical skill is a bit of a weird one, increasing unit caps for non-elites with no larger than a 50mm base by 1. However, since the model has to carry the skill, it allows the skill to persist even if said model is slain. If the max cap size is reduced to its normal cap size, and the model holding the skill is slain, then the cap size will return to normal. Definitely makes it less feel bad, and in a way is a skill to a warband rather than to a model, kind of. Infernal Noble's next, and its Blessed Murder Blessing token is now only gained through melee kills, largely limiting its effectiveness with range-heavy factions such as the Heretic Legion. Blood Sacrifice also catches a weird restriction, only allowing the transfer of the blood marker to a non-demonic, Grail, or artificial unit, and line of sight is needed to do so. Lash of Acheron also catches a similar line of sight clause, making a bit more sense than the previous ability, all things considered. Finally, the Sadistic skill catches a restriction to only apply the +1 dice modifiers on melee attacks. Overall, Infernal Noble was chained back a lot here. Really wasn't sure as to why, as I didn't think many armies abused the Infernal Noble, but maybe I'm missing something. Sublime Gate Sultan's Favor is changed to a clause similar to that of the logistical skill, limiting units in a 50mm base or larger, and allowing the skill to persist on death of a model bearing it. Order of the Fly's Cockroach Vitality was changed to deny blood markers to be spent to add to injury rolls, rather than its former iteration being to add to hit rolls. The Zeed of Beelzebub was clarified for its swapping rules being the center of the models, and restricted the use of any bases touch either impassable terrain or the base of another model, so no more cheese swapping. Mammon catches a simple restriction with money can buy anything to only 1 model bearing this skill. I guess it can only buy anything once. Finally, Anti-Pope of Agavon's Eye of Beelzebub can no longer target an enemy model within 1 inch of a friendly model, ideally to prevent your opponents from getting a free attack of opportunity from you. Silver Tongue is also changed to restrict the effect to only one attack, regardless of how many attacks the model can make numerous times. On to campaign changes. The way the campaign victories are calculated are no longer from victory points between games, but rather a system of campaign victory points, giving a better flow for final rankings. Random generated scenarios are also dead. Rest in peace. Glorious Deeds also grant 1 victory point in scenarios, acting as a pseudo tiebreaker at times. Suicidal tactics might actually play in your favor now. A pretty notable change to any model who is retired with 2 battle scars or die from their 3rd battle scar, you can now keep the items that they were wielding, only losing them if they died to a trauma effect. Thankfully, my castigators won't give up their anti-tank hammers anymore. Promotions will now happen before the advancements. This huge change lets newly promoted elites gain XP points right off the bat, which is a huge change. Also, a model being promoted doesn't end the promotion sequence, which means you can also keep fishing for more. Unfortunately for promotions, however, winning a match no longer gives you an extra dice to roll. In this sense, elites are far more skilled, but less likely to happen. In regards to individual unit promotions, the Warwolf and the Fly Thrall are no longer capable of becoming elites, while all mercenaries are now eligible to do so. Very little skill changes have taken place, but let's start with Gunslinger, which now gives all pistols equipped Assault, and any model with 2 pistols can resolve 2 ranged attacks, 1 with each pistol equipped. Real Wild West, well, gunslinging energy. Additionally, it allows the models armed with a single pistol to ignore offhand penalties, so any instrument or banner bearer gets a touch more lethal. Far Shot now affects arquebus weapons. Yippee! Sixth Sense was clarified to its most confusing ruling finally, which allows the skill and the tough keyword to change the first out of action into a no effect. This vastly increases the survivability of tough models from getting one-tapped, say something like a Court Hunter. Bad Company was slightly changed to consider the elite model with this skill as a non-elite for the sake of elite caps, rather than its old iteration of increasing the elite cap from 6 to 7. Finally, War Stories gives all elite units without the skill an extra XP point, being a pretty massive way to level any elite heavy warbands. It's honestly kinda cracked. Glory items and equipment are next. Trench Dogs no longer factor in the model count for morale checks, and also cannot be promoted to elites. Hellhounds now gain the gas keyword if they were taken in a Black Grail or Knights of Avarice warband, rather than its normal fire keyword. Mercy Dogs can no longer drag friendly models when it retreats or charges, now only being able to drag during a normal or a dash move. Scenario changes for one-off games. It is now recommended to take 800 ducats and 6 glory points, making it smaller from its old iteration. The book also recommends changing the size of the board to 36 by 36 to make games faster and more dynamic, I assume. Most scenarios have changed wildly, and as the community changelog points out, there's a metric fuck ton of cover, so best just to give them a read again despite seeming similar. Okay, theoretical halfway point here. Let's start with the one and only New Antioch. For general changes, the Trench Cleric and his equivalents in other warbands can use both of their abilities now, not only having to choose between one or the other, but now gets to have both, doubling his effectiveness. Sniper Priests now get a +2 dice to their aim risky action, making them similar to the others like the War Prophets. Combat Engineers take a huge nerf here, losing +1 dice to ranged attacks in exchange for +1 dice in melee. This is pretty severe all things considered, as the best delivery method for satchel charges and SMGs see a huge decrease in effectiveness, leaving more expensive and less synergistic units like the mech infantry to do their job. There's very little reason to round out a list with a shittier melee than a shock trooper with less accuracy on our needed role. Really hope to see this one changed. Engineers also lose the +1 dice on their action to use their Fortify ability, further invalidating them as a selection to your warband. Kinda just doesn't make sense. Mech infantry are now always set to a 40mm base to fit their heavy armor, so hopefully your glue didn't stick too well to those bases you had before. Yeomen don't need any mandatory weapons anymore, but still come with their discounted rifles. Not sure why you not arm them, but here we are. Combat medics get a nice buff by having a +2 dice on medikit actions now, while being able to carry more battle kit. Kinda nice. Finally, the lieutenant's ability was renamed Hold Your Fire and is now just an action with no roll needed behind it, making it far more reliable. Papal State's intervention force saw little changes where the Swiss Guard are not restricted to non-elite units while also being completely free and have their forces reduced by 200 ducats for the glory in exchange. Irie Rangers can get ammo-piercing ammunition for 5 ducats and up to 2 of them. They also carry an extra satchel charge and 2 extra engineers. Seems provisions have been favorable for them. Any limit on fire teams and greatswords have been lifted, but in exchange the mech infantry cannot take great melee weapons. The Fianna also break free of their restrictions on caps. Interestingly, the Trench Cleric gets a huge trade by losing the Onward Christian Soldier's ability in exchange for 2 skills, the Away Serpents and Arise and Be Healed, making them a huge buff piece in this warband. Finally, this warband is now restricted to the Learned Say Patron. Onto Alba, the bagpipes get double their aura size to 8 inches for their Negating Fear bagpipes. Cold Steel allows the first purchase of a melee weapon to be cut in half. Pretty useless, to be honest. Dum Dum ammunition can be taken for 5 ducats here, granting the critical keyword to a ranged weapon, up to 3 of them. Highland Strength gives Shock Troopers and Lieutenants the strong keyword. Kinda strange considering Shock Troopers already ignore heavy penalties, but sure. Lastly, Alba gets access to the Brutal Lawchapper Axe, and probably the premier weapon for this detachment, almost getting as close to its Tank Splitter brother. Speaking of, Prussia next, the big banger of New Antioch. The Trench Clerics here can take a new item called Holy Smoke, negating fear and giving the cleric -1 dice to injure. Tank Splitters take a bit of a nerf here, reducing their limit cap from 3 to 2. They can no longer stack with the Dragon Slayer Patron ability, making the classic uncontested one-shot impossible. Big sad all around. Finally, and strangely enough, no models can take the martyrdom pills in this detachment. What a strange nerf to catch from martyr penitents. Maybe the folks at Trench Crusade forgot to read. Lastly, the Expeditionary Forces of Abyssinia, Trench Cleric, and Holy Warriors can use the Onward Christian Soldiers, Blessed Psalm, and God's Mercy all at the same time. And now, God's Mercy heals D3 blood markers instead of 1. You can also have a max cap of 2 combat medics. On to our favorite crazed zealots, the Trench Pilgrims saw their fair share of general changes. Firstly, they now have the blunderbuss in their armory. It's a pretty cute weapon overall. Flamers are limited to 2 for these peeps, rather strange, but sure. Polearms decrease the cost from 10 to 7, kinda nice for any shooty pilgrim who doesn't want to be charged to have some defense. Huge change here is where the musical instrument is no longer restricted to the non-elites. This lets your beefier leaders carry themselves into combat more reliably, where a lot of the pilgrim powerhouses are. The punt gun gains a bunch of keywords to allow it to work as intended, while also only needing to make the previous restriction of the strong or the friendly model nearby for the overcharged shots, making it more versatile and reliable. The War Prophet gets some tweaks on both ends, starting with Loudspeaker where they can now move 3 inches even if no enemies are visible, basically giving your Prophet and all around them a 50%-ish movement buff should your action succeed, so a huge buff here. This, however, is followed by a nerf to Laying on Hands, where it is now only healing 1 blood marker or 3 on a critical success to the action roll. Really sad to see this one happen. As for a nerf that absolutely needed to happen, the Martyr Penitent can no longer take martyrdom pills, ending the reign of terror for these guys. The Anchorite Shrine got a new ability to better word how it resolves its attacks, and the better wording is added to the Broken of the Wheel ability as well. Its biggest change was to set ability, where breaking a unit over the wheel is now considering it to remove it from the warband, meaning that the unit would have died and cannot be resurrected as a martyr penitent. This is a really big hit to the army as a whole, as not being able to guarantee a tanky unit being churned out from the pain factory does make your army overall a bit more frail. Martyrdom devices on the ecclesiastic prisoners no longer require an action roll, so no duds being sent to the front lines anymore, and they got their melee attack back with their feeble flailing. Sacred Affliction surprisingly saw little changes, but that might be due to so many core changes taking place. The only restriction added is that any unit carrying the Wrath of God upgrade can no longer be broken on the wheel. On to St. Methodius, where we see some changes, mainly to yet another restriction on units, no longer being able to take ammo monks or communicant anti-tank hunters. Gunsmiths gives access to 1 auto rifle for 40 ducats, 2 machine guns for 50, and 1 submachine gun for 30. Still a bit pricey, all things considered. Anchorite Armory changes a lot here, starting with the anti-material rifle being 40 ducats instead of 2 glory, opening it up to more initial builds. The trench mortar can no longer target any unit or point within 6 inches of the anchorite attacking, as to not blow off its own legs. Makes sense. The gas sensor is now a ranged weapon and always ignores armor, which also makes sense, it's a gas after all. The autocannon doesn't automatically end the activation of the shrine, which is insane honestly, and a huge boost to an already great loadout for them. The Wrathful Cherub face sees a great buff where the models can't take risky actions while within 1 inch of the shrine, making this one just a bit better to take. Finally, Anchorite equipment cannot be removed or lost, which is nice, but also a double-edged sword if you need to make some changes to strategy or tactics. Make sure you choose wisely. Cavalcade of the 10th Plague gets minor changes, giving a Castigator the tough keyword for free, and the War Prophet's ability Day of His Wrath gets +1 dice to injure on a critical success roll. On to the Iron Sultanate, there's a new glory item called the Taquine Anka Bird that gives engaged enemies risky to their melee attacks or to retreat actions. The Assassin's Dagger was reverted to let a dash or retreat action. Nice little fix there. Alchemist armor wording was fixed to make it work as intended versus gas and fire attacks, yet another fix of poor wording. Zeus bosses can be upgraded to veterans, giving them both strong and the countercharge ability for 10 ducats at 0 limits, which is a pretty huge buff. Alchemists no longer get +1 to the risky actions when changing their keyword on the Master of Elements ability. Feels bad, maybe they're not masters. The Assassins has had a lot of wording changes, particularly his temporal ability works exactly how you'd think. He chooses 2 legal targets and attacks them in order, ending on the second model. Additionally, the time split ability was clarified to state that his extra movement is considered a redeploy. Lions of Jabir are now always on a 50mm base. Have fun with that. Additionally, they can now pay 5 ducats to get fear, making them a bit better as an anvil piece on the board. The Brazen Bull is putting his leg day squats to work as he can now trample any target, no longer limited to any base size. For the Fidai of Alamut, the Bow of Alamut, the teleportation effect no longer counts as having been charged for the purposes of skill, weapons, abilities, or glorious deeds. Also, kinda counterintuitive, but due to the bow not having assault, you can't shoot and fight in the same turn when you use the bow to teleport. Seems unintentional, but that's the way the rules are written right now. Pretty sure this one's gonna get changed. Next is House of Wisdom, where the Kavaz can only take 3 Azebs that can be promoted to Kavaz. A nerf to the secret of the House of Wisdom, Cartography and Geometry, where you no longer get a free explore dice in campaign play. This one definitely hurts. Additionally, the Philosophy, Poetry, and Theology portion becomes pretty strong, as it no longer requires that any success rolls become risky success rolls when your warband becomes shaken. Additionally, the Alchemist also just gets to have negate fear for free. In terms of weapons collection, it has to be done at the beginning of the warband creation, not at any time that you choose, so be sure to choose carefully. The fire shield has also been changed to allow you to protect against attacks from fire that have the ignore armor keyword, otherwise it would be pretty useless. For the defenders of the Iron Wall, there's been some rules clarification for the Grand Cannon, where the line of sight is drawn from the cannon and not the person wielding it. Next is the Heretic Legion, starting with the Tartarus Claw, where it now only moves 3 inches instead of the 6 that it used to after it resolves its attacks. Heretic Priest's Puppet Master now requires line of sight, thank God. The Werewolf is now increased from 140 ducats to 145, and it can no longer be promoted in campaigns. Loping Dash from the Werewolf also only gives +1 dice to dash instead of 2. The Anointed got changed from what everyone pretty sure pointed out was a mistake, which was an 8-inch move down to a 6-inch move of a normal infantry. The Artillery Witch is now 100 ducats instead of 90, and when hit directly by a witch, it is still blown away from it should it survive. A change to the Artillery Witch Battery clause, where a second witch can be included if the total cost of the rest of the warband adds up to 1,000 ducats or more. Additionally, the Levitate ability for the Artillery Witch no longer requires a risky success roll when she needs to climb or jump, she just levitates. The Wretched can also take a battle kit of up to 10 ducats, including ranged weapons, which they couldn't do before. They are also not limited by the number of Heretic models in the warband anymore, so you can go mass Wretched spam. They also have the Heretic keyword now, and the blessing granted on death is given to the closest elite instead of any elite. Finally, for the Wretched, the Law of Hell now only triggers when taking an elite out of action, no longer when achieving a glorious deed, so you don't lose your guys by mistake. The Death Commando also gains the Heretic keyword, just a nice little way to round things out. On to Trench Ghosts, the Tank Pelican now has a height bonus of 3 inches to reflect the new height rules, and it only counts for determining elevation bonuses when made by a ranged attack. It also now treats down injuries as minor wounds. For the Knights of Avarice, Corrupted Merchants is now limited to 1 piece of battle kit for both New Antioch and Iron Sultanate. You must purchase them when creating your warband, similar to the Iron Sultanate. Heretic Priests must change Puppet Master for Price of Greed, no more keeping a very busted ability. Price of Greed also requires line of sight, much like the changes to Puppet Master. The gas bombs from the Artillery Witch now are 2d6 with a -1 dice to injury to targets whether the hit was direct or indirect. Gas Bomb Choking Gas from the Artillery Witch now has a staggered D3 after hit or if the hit model is not taken out of action. The Golden Calf Altar now always provides the difficult terrain effect, whether it is being carried or placed on the ground. The Tarnished Armor price is down to 25 ducats from the 45, but no negate shrapnel anymore. Instead, it now provokes a charge even if the bearer should be in cover. The Standard of Mammon now prevents enemies from standing up even if the bearer is down themselves. Enemies that charge to within 1 inch of the Standard of Mammon bearer must pass a success roll or be downed as well. Lastly, they can take both a Glory Goetic Warlock and a Ducat Goetic Warlock, letting you basically double your cap. Lastly, the Naval Raiding Party is now able to have 0 to 2 Anointed as opposed to only being able to take 1. On to Black Grail with their fair share of changes. The Grail Devotee, up to 2 models can now have up to 2 devotees to a total of 4. The second devotee on each is going to cost 2 glory instead of 15 ducats, which is going to hamper your glory significantly. Parasite grenades now work on models immune to fear, which should make them see more play. The parasitic grenades as well now have the ignore cover and the ignore long range to follow the normal grenade keywords. The putrid shotgun has the shotgun keyword, makes sense. The Viscera Cannon now places an infection marker instead of a blood marker on the target, which allows more versatility around the infection markers. The Lord of Tumor is now on a 50mm base, and also Beelzebub's Touch now triggers on either a blood or an infection marker. The Knights of the Rotten Cross are now limited to 1. The Corpse Guard Parasitic Tick ability now triggers on both infection and blood markers, making them more relevant in games. The Grail Thrall's Overwhelming Horde is not capped anymore, making the Horde overwhelming. The Grail Flies, Thralls, and Dogs now also negate gas, giving them more immunity against themselves. Infected proboscis not limited to non-Grail units anymore, and only trigger on an infection marker. The Amalgam, similar to the Brazen Bull, is no longer restricted to 32mm base on its trample ability. However, its Unstoppable does not work against bases greater than 32 mils. The Amalgam's weaponry is also now not restricted to a heavy weapon being necessary. You just get to choose two two-handed weapons. The Amalgam can take one shoot action with each ranged weapon it has, and one fight action with each melee weapon it has. Depending on what your loadout is, this could matter or it could not. Lastly, the Plague Blade limit has been increased from 2 to 3. The Dirge of the Great Hegemon has seen a couple of changes where bereaved Fry Thralls can now take ranged weapons, grenades, musical instruments, or a troop flag. Hegemon's Will now requires a successful action. Infection markers can now only be removed from enemy models. Following the successful action, you can now remove any number of infection markers. You can command one bereaved for each marker removed this way, though a bereaved still cannot command more than once per turn. On to everyone's favorite demonic warband, the Core of the Seven-Headed Serpent. The Goetic Power is now the name for the Court's special abilities. The Goetic abilities are passive, and the Goetic spells enable a new action, which is now called Casting Spell. All Goetic spells are actions and do not require a roll to succeed. You can now use a cast spell action more than once per activation, but you cannot cast the same spell more than once per activation. This was a really big change, as I remember 1.0 court players losing their minds, and rightfully so, but this brings back things to where they used to be. Blood markers used to cast Goetic spells must come from the models currently on the battlefield, so no models that have been eaten by a Sin Eater or such. The Arquebus in this warband gains the keyword Cumbersome. The Slave Master ability is 18 inches plus line of sight required. Funnily enough, it can target all Yoke Fiends instead of just friendly Yoke Fiends, which I'm pretty sure you can make them kill themselves now. The Sorcerer can still be taken as a leader, but no longer has the leader keyword. Interesting. The Hunter of the Left-Handed Path cannot take two-handed weapons because the Bow of Leith is now a one-handed weapon. The Hunter of the Left-Hand Path's Left-Hand Path ability can be used on any terrain, not just 2 inches or more wide. To both start and finish the move, they must finish 1 inch away from any enemy models. This makes the already elusive Hunter even more of a pain to handle, as they don't have to always measure out to see if they can teleport on a terrain piece. The Pit Locust can always make 2 attacks instead of only after the charge, doubling its output. The Desecrated Saint can make a fight action with each weapon it is armed with, implying it can make other actions in between. The Desecrated Saint's Aura of Lust is now range 4 instead of range 6, catching a small 2-inch debuff. The Wretched can take any number of battle kit up to 10, similar to what we've talked about before. The Envious Eye's Goetic ability for the Sorcerer can now use both a ranged weapon and the Burning Inferno, as the Burning Inferno is now a cast spell action and not a ranged attack action. The Envious Eye's ability can also take any piece of battle kit from its old restriction of weapons and armor only. The Coveted Position Goetic spell can only target something within 12 inches of range, in line of sight, and more than 1 inch away from any other models, tightening up the restriction on being able to swap places. For Lust, the Forbidden Pleasure Goetic ability now starts you off with 3 blood markers instead of the 2. Sloth's Charm of Acedia Goetic spell now is increased by 15 ducats from its original price, and can affect any success roll the caster makes. This includes Burning Inferno, which wasn't available before as it attacked the ground. On to Gluttony. The Uncaring Gluttony Goetic spell can be used as a spell action and can target a unit that hasn't been activated this turn instead of not activated this battle. Eater of Flesh Goetic ability no longer allows you to attack or engage friendly models, but instead lets you heal for each blood marker you deal. On to Greed, the Black Heart Goetic spell is now 5 ducats instead of 15, seeing a pretty hefty discount. Lastly, we'll go on to the Mercenaries, and to cover what we've said before, they can now all be promoted to elites. There's a new unit called the Sister of St. Cosmas. It's basically an old combat medic with fixed equipment, while the new NA combat medic, as we've mentioned before, can now take more battle kit. There's also the combat biologist as well. As for the Sister of St. Cosmas, previously the combat medic, they get 2+ dice instead of 1+ dice for the medikit action. The Witch Burner is now an elite and doesn't need to be promoted one. The Observer's Eye of God ability is now clarified that all dice must be rerolled. If the reroll fails, you place 1 blood marker on the Observer, and if it goes down, if it's already down, you put 2 blood markers on it instead, as you would normally. The Sin Eater gains the demonic keyword, gains a combat helmet, and the devoured models from inside do not benefit from any abilities or weapon. They are basically gone. Devoured models can also not be affected by anything else. The Scripture Guardian is now on a 40mm base, and it goes from +1 a range to nothing. The ability is no longer a range/melee attack. Now you choose a target within 18 inches, rolling the success roll with +1, and if the target is within 9 inches, +2 dice to that. On a successful roll, it rolls an injury ignoring armor and a +1 to the injury roll for each blood marker on the target. The Mendelus Ammo Monk cartridge of Wrath Sacrament does not work with weapons with the blast or flamethrower keywords. Echo of His Word is now changed from -1 injury to -1 dice to injury. Mamluk Ferris either has a greatsword, a polearm, and a trench shield, or a pistol and a sword/axe. In addition, they can have the Jezzail with alchemical ammunition. Martial Prowess, in addition, also removed the heavy from the greatsword. Finally, the Goetic Warlock's Goetic Gaze is not modified the same way as an attack would be for a ranged action, but is a simple success roll. That rounds all the changes that I've covered here for the 1.01 changes for Trench Crusade. It's quite a bit, so I've added chapters so that you can hopefully skip to the part that pertains to you the most. It's quite a lot to look over, so be sure to give it a read or just watch this video over and over if it helps put it in your mind. I would advise, if you've played Trench Crusade before using this rule set, that you go back and maybe play a practice game or so. There's a lot of things that are the same, but a lot of things that are different and kind of easy to miss. That about wraps it up. Thank you for watching this very long video and for hopefully enjoying the content. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe, and check out the Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. Thank you very much. Until next time. Thank you to all my patrons in the Engine Seer tier, and a special thank you to the Fabricators with Sid Lawson Jr., Sekartor, 3x01, Niall Lore, 74th Inquisitional Task Force, Megalio, Rising Grace, Dr. Doggerino, Led, Exotic Spoon, Valenquer, Isaac the Rat, and Forge World Tempestari. Thank you very much, guys.